Silent wings. The heavy oak doors of Reed Manor always seemed to close a little louder whenever Olivia entered a room. Not that anyone noticed. Her presence was as ethereal as morning mist, easily overlooked amid the boisterous energy of her siblings. Tonight was no different as the Reed family gathered in the study for their father's birthday celebration. "Father, I've secured that acquisition you wanted," announced Nathaniel, the eldest, clapping a hand on their father's shoulder. "The German printing press will be ours by quarter's end, and I've finalized the contracts for those best-selling authors from the West Coast," added Penelope, her diamond bracelet catching the firelight as she gestured dramatically. They practically begged to join Reed Publishing. Their father, Edmund Reed, nodded approvingly, his weathered face creasing into a rare smile. "This is why Reed Publishing has dominated for 3 generations. Ambition runs in our blood." Olivia stood in the corner, clutching a leather-bound notebook. At 26, she was the youngest Reed, forever living in the shadow of her successful siblings. While they had followed their father into the publishing business with ruthless precision, Olivia's passion lay not in acquiring words, but in creating them. "Father," she said softly, stepping forward during a rare moment of silence, "I've finished my manuscript. It's a novel about—" "Not now, Olivia," Edmund waved dismissively. "We're discussing business matters," Nathaniel snickered, still scribbling. "Fairy tales, little sister? Some of us have real work to do." "It's not a fairy tale," Olivia insisted, her voice barely audible. "It's literary fiction, about a woman who discovers her voice after what? Being rescued by some dashing prince?" Penelope rolled her eyes. "Really, Olivia, you're so predictable and fragile, always living in your imagination instead of reality." The familiar sting of their dismissal burned, but Olivia had grown accustomed to it. In the Reed family, worth was measured by contribution to the family empire, and dreams were only valuable if they increased profit margins. "You should consider that editorial assistant position I offered," Edmund said, not looking at her. "At least then you'd be doing something useful for Reed Publishing." "I don't want to edit others' words, Father. I want to write my own." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that preceded a storm. Edmund's expression hardened. "Writing is for people we publish, Olivia, not for Reeds. We build empires, not fantasies." The conversation shifted back to business strategies and acquisition targets, Olivia's presence once again forgotten. Later that night, she retreated to her small bedroom in the East Wing, the farthest from the family quarters, as if even their sleeping arrangements reflected her status as an outsider. 3 months later, Edmund Reed died suddenly of a heart attack. The family gathered in the same study, this time with Edmund's attorney present. Nathaniel sat in their father's chair with natural entitlement, while Penelope paced by the window, both of them dressed impeccably in mourning attire. Olivia sat silently as the attorney read the will. Reed Publishing would be divided between Nathaniel and Penelope. The summer house went to Nathaniel, the Manhattan apartment to Penelope, bank accounts, investments, art collections, all meticulously distributed between the 2 siblings. Olivia's name never came up. When the attorney finished, she spoke up. "Excuse me, but was there nothing for me?" The attorney looked uncomfortable. "I'm afraid not, Miss Reed. Your father was quite specific." "There was a note," Nathaniel said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "He left this for you." Alone. In her room, Olivia opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Her father's rigid handwriting cut across the page. "Olivia, I've provided for those who will continue the Reed legacy. Your siblings will allow you to stay at Reed Manor for 6 months, sufficient time for you to abandon these writing fantasies and find your place in the real world. You wouldn't survive without the Reed name anyway. It's time you understood." And that night, through silent tears, Olivia made a decision. She wouldn't stay for 6 months. She wouldn't beg for a place in their world. By dawn, she had packed her essential belongings and the manuscript they had never bothered to read, left without saying goodbye. They probably wouldn't notice she was gone until the housekeeper mentioned her absence. Quiet exodus. The coastal town of Harborview emerged through the morning mist as Olivia's train pulled into the station. Unlike the imposing skyline of the city she'd left behind, this place welcomed visitors with weathered fishing boats, salt-kissed air, and buildings painted in faded blues and greens. It was the antithesis of everything Reed, humble where her family was grandiose, authentic where they were superficial. Olivia had chosen it precisely for these reasons. With her meager savings and one suitcase containing clothes, her manuscript, and a few cherished books, she stepped onto the platform. The inheritance she'd been denied could have bought this entire town, but standing there with the wind in her hair, Olivia felt strangely liberated. "First time in Harborview?" asked an elderly woman manning a small tourist information booth. "First time anywhere that's truly mine," Olivia replied, surprising herself with her candor. The woman, Mrs. Fletcher, according to her name tag, smiled warmly. "Well then, welcome to your new beginning." That beginning took shape in the form of a small apartment above a bookstore called Tidal Pages. The owner, Eleanor Whitman, a retired English professor with silver hair and sharp eyes, had advertised for a shop assistant with a genuine love of literature rather than bestseller lists. During her interview, when Eleanor asked why she'd left the city, Olivia considered fabricating a story. "My family owns Reed Publishing," she said instead, watching Eleanor's eyebrows rise. "But they made it clear there's no place for me in their world. I want to write, not acquire and sell." "Reed Publishing," Eleanor mused, studying Olivia with newfound interest. "They've become quite the corporate machine in recent years, haven't they? All about market share and bottom lines rather than nurturing new voices." "That's my brother Nathaniel's vision," Olivia admitted. "Bigger, faster, more profitable. And what's yours?" "Stories that matter, words that remain after the bestseller lists change." Eleanor hired her on the spot, offering the apartment as part of her compensation. "The shop doesn't make enough to pay much, but it's a place to land, and there's plenty of quiet for writing." Months passed in a gentle rhythm unlike anything Olivia had known. Mornings in the bookshop arranging displays and recommending titles to customers, afternoons serving coffee at the Harbour Cafe for extra income, evenings and early mornings devoted to revising her manuscript, which she titled Silent Wings, a story about a woman finding freedom by embracing her own voice. While Olivia was building her quiet life, the Reed empire continued its expansion. Occasionally, she'd glimpse industry news, Nathaniel's aggressive acquisition of smaller publishing houses, Penelope's splashy parties courting celebrity authors. Their faces appeared in business magazines and literary gossip columns, always impeccably dressed, always radiating that particular Reed confidence. They never mentioned their missing sister. It was as if Olivia had never existed. "Doesn't it bother you?" Eleanor asked one rainy evening as they closed the shop. On the counter lay a literary journal featuring Penelope Reed on the cover, announcing Reed Publishing's new imprint for emerging voices. "The irony isn't lost on me," Olivia said with a wry smile, closing the journal. "They couldn't hear the voice in their own home, but now they're supposedly champions of new talent." "You should submit your manuscript to other publishers," Eleanor suggested, not for the first time. "Your work deserves to be read." But Olivia hesitated. Submitting meant risking rejection, and she'd had enough rejection for a lifetime. Besides, the manuscript still felt incomplete somehow, lacking a resolution she hadn't yet lived. Winter gave way to spring, and Harborview began preparing for its annual arts festival. Eleanor convinced Olivia to lead a writing workshop, something small for local enthusiasts. To her surprise, the workshop filled quickly, and Olivia found herself standing before a group of 12 eager participants in the bookstore's back room. Writing isn't about having the loudest voice, she told them, echoing words she'd written to herself countless times. It's about having the truest one. Among her students was Thomas Mercer, the town's newspaper editor, who approached her after the third session. "You have a gift for teaching," he said. "Would you consider writing a weekly column for our arts section? Something about literature, writing process, whatever inspires you." Olivia's first column, titled "Finding Your Voice in a Noisy World," resonated beyond Harborview. A literary blog picked it up, then another. Soon, editors from regional magazines were reaching out, offering her freelance opportunities. Words that had once been trapped in her private notebooks now traveled beyond her, creating unexpected connections. For the first time, Olivia's voice wasn't being silenced or dismissed. It was being sought out. On the 1-year anniversary of her arrival in Harborview, Olivia sat on the small balcony of her apartment, watching fishing boats return as the sun set. Her laptop contained the final draft of Silent Wings, now transformed by her experiences. Tomorrow, she would send it to 5 carefully selected publishers, none affiliated with Reed Publishing. Ink and inspiration. The rejection letters arrived with painful regularity throughout the spring, each one polite, sometimes even encouraging, but ultimately the same. "Not quite right for our list at this time." Olivia kept them in a wooden box, not as self-punishment but as testimony to her persistence. By summer, the box was nearly full. "That's the nature of publishing," Eleanor consoled her one evening as they shared tea after closing the bookshop. "Even the greats collected rejections before finding the right home for their work." "I know," Olivia nodded, tracing the rim of her cup. "I just can't help wondering if I'd have better luck if I used a pseudonym instead of my real name." Eleanor's eyebrows arched. "You think publishers are rejecting you because you're a Reed, or because I'm not Reed enough?" Olivia said with a hollow laugh. "Either they're competitors who won't touch anything associated with my family, or they assume I'm trading on the name without having talent. That manuscript is yours, not your family's," Eleanor said firmly. "Your voice, your story. Don't let them take ownership of that too." The next morning, Olivia received an email that stood out from the others. Not a form rejection, but a personal note from Westridge Press, a small but respected independent publisher known for literary fiction. "Dear Ms. Reed, thank you for submitting Silent Wings. While most submissions cross my desk without leaving an impression, yours has lingered in my thoughts for weeks. There's an authenticity to your protagonist's journey that resonates deeply. I'd like to discuss your manuscript further. Our press is small, but we're committed to nurturing distinctive voices. If you're interested, please call me at your convenience. Sincerely, Julian Caldwell, Senior Editor, Westridge Press." Olivia read the email 3 times before calling the number with trembling fingers. The voice that answered was warm, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "I was beginning to think you weren't going to call," Julian said after she introduced herself. "I've been carrying your manuscript everywhere for 2 weeks. You printed it out?" she asked, surprised in an age of digital submissions. "I believe in reading words on paper," he replied, "especially words that matter." They spoke for over an hour. Unlike the Reed approach to publishing, calculating market potential and profit margins, Julian talked about emotional resonance and cultural significance. He asked questions that showed he'd not only read her work, but understood it on a level even Olivia hadn't fully articulated. "There's a scene where your protagonist stands at the window of her new apartment," he said. "The description of how the light falls differently than in her family home. That's when I knew this wasn't just fiction for you." Olivia felt exposed, yet seen in a way she never had before. "You have good instincts." "That's my job," he replied. "Finding the truth beneath the story." 2 weeks later, Julian visited Harborview to meet in person. Olivia had imagined someone older, perhaps resembling the tweedy professors who frequented Eleanor's shop. Instead, Julian Caldwell was in his mid-30s, with thoughtful eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses and an easy smile that appeared most often when discussing books he loved. They walked along the harbour as Julian outlined Westridge's vision for Silent Wings. It would be published in the spring, with a modest first print run, but a dedicated marketing plan focused on independent bookstores and literary festivals. "We're not Reed Publishing," he said, addressing the elephant in the room. "We can't offer a six-figure advance or billboards in Times Square." "I don't want those things," Olivia assured him. "I just want readers who connect with the story." Julian studied her for a moment. "May I ask something personal?" She nodded, bracing herself. "Why? Did you leave? The Reed name opens doors most writers would sacrifice anything for." The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. As they sat on a bench overlooking the water, Olivia found herself telling Julian everything: the years of dismissal, her father's final rejection, the inheritance that wrote her out of the family narrative. "They made it clear I wasn't Reed enough to matter," she concluded. "My voice didn't fit their brand." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "Then they fundamentally misunderstood what makes writing powerful," he finally said. "It's not about fitting a brand, it's about being unmistakably yourself on the page." He turned to face her directly. "Your manuscript isn't valuable despite not being Reed enough. It's valuable because it's authentically Olivia." Something shifted in that moment. A wound beginning to heal. A doubt finally silenced. Over the following months, Olivia worked closely with Julian to refine her manuscript. Their collaboration began professionally, with weekly phone calls and detailed editorial notes, but gradually evolved into something more personal. Julian started visiting Harborview monthly, their editing sessions extending into dinner conversations that ranged far beyond the manuscript. "You know," Julian confessed during one such dinner at a small seafood restaurant overlooking the harbour, "when I first saw the name Reed on your submission, I almost passed it along to another editor." Olivia stiffened. "Because of my family." "Because I've met your brother Nathaniel at industry events," Julian clarified. "He represents everything I find troubling about modern publishing, treating books like widgets, authors like content producers." "And now?" Olivia asked, holding her breath. Julian smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Now I'm grateful every day that I actually read those first pages. Your writing is the antithesis of everything the Reed Empire stands for. It has heart, honesty, vulnerability." As winter descended on Harborview, bringing dramatic storms that crashed against the harbour walls, Olivia's relationship with Julian deepened. Their editorial discussions evolved into long walks along the windswept beach and quiet evenings in the corner of Eleanor's bookshop. Julian began recommending obscure novels that had shaped his understanding of literature, and Olivia shared fragments of new stories forming in her mind. "You should start your second book," Julian encouraged her as they finalized the last edits on Silent Wings. "This one will find its readers, but you shouldn't stop here." "One step at a time," Olivia laughed, though secretly she had already begun outlining a new novel, one about finding unexpected connection in a world that had previously offered only rejection. When the advance copy of Silent Wings arrived in January, Olivia traced her name on the cover with disbelieving fingers. There it was, in elegant typography, Olivia Reed, not hiding behind a pseudonym, not trading on her family name, but standing in her own truth. "It's real," she whispered. Julian squeezed her hand. "It always was. Now everyone else will know it too." Pages of Transformation Spring arrived with unexpected momentum. What Westridge Press had planned as a modest launch for Silent Wings quickly evolved into something more significant when an influential literary blogger described the novel as breathtakingly honest, the debut of a major new voice. 3 prominent review publications followed with similar praise, each highlighting the emotional authenticity of Olivia's writing. "I don't understand," Olivia told Julian during one of their daily calls. "There are so many talented writers. Why is my book connecting like this?" "Because you wrote from the wound," Julian replied simply. "That's where the light gets in." Westridge scheduled a small book tour, 6 cities, primarily independent bookstores. On the evening before her departure, Eleanor closed Tidal Pages early for a private launch party. The small shop overflowed with Harborview residents who had watched Olivia's journey unfold. Thomas, from the newspaper, presented her with a framed copy of her first column. "From local columnist to literary sensation," he beamed. "We knew you when." Mrs. Fletcher from the tourist booth brought homemade cookies. "For sustenance on your travels," she insisted, pressing the container into Olivia's hands. As she thanked them all, Olivia caught sight of Julian watching from the corner, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. In the months of working together, their professional relationship had evolved into friendship, and then gradually, almost imperceptibly, into a tender territory neither had officially acknowledged. The tour exceeded all expectations. What began as modest gatherings of literary enthusiasts grew into standing-room-only events as word spread. Readers approached Olivia with tears in their eyes, sharing how her protagonist's journey of finding her voice had mirrored their own. "Struggles? Your book gave me courage to finally leave a toxic situation," one woman confided at a Chicago bookstore. "I've been silencing myself for years." In Boston, a college student asked, "How did you know when it was time to walk away from people who couldn't see your worth?" These conversations both humbled and fortified Olivia. Each night in her hotel room, she called Julian to process the day's events. "I never expected this," she admitted after a particularly emotional reading. "I wrote this story to make sense of my own experience, not to become some kind of reluctant spokesperson for self-discovery." "The most personal stories often become the most universal," Julian said. "That's the paradox of good writing." "You deserve this success," Julian told her when she returned to Harborview, both of them walking along their favorite estuary. "Between us," Julian repeated softly, "you were my editor first and now we're friends, but lately I've been wondering if—" Julian gently took her hand, interrupting her nervous ramble. "Olivia, I've been falling in love with you since page 73 of your manuscript." "Page 73, she echoed, momentarily distracted. He laughed. "That's where your protagonist realizes she doesn't need validation from people who never truly saw her. I remember reading it and thinking, I want to meet the woman who wrote these words." Their first kiss tasted of salt air and new beginnings. Later, as they sat on the beach watching the sunset, Julian confessed something he'd been holding back. "Your siblings know about the book's success," he said carefully. "Nathaniel Reed called our office last week." Olivia's body tensed. What did he want? "To discuss potential synergies between Reed Publishing and Westridge Press," Julian said, his tone making clear what he thought of the idea. "I suspect it was an attempt to get information about you." The news should have upset her, but Olivia found herself surprisingly unmoved. "They don't get to be part of this," she said simply. "This success belongs to the people who believed in me when I was nothing to the world. Eleanor, the people of Harborview. You." As summer progressed, Olivia settled into a new rhythm. Mornings devoted to writing her second novel, afternoons split between interviews and correspondence with readers. Evenings with Julian, building a relationship as honest as her prose. She kept her apartment above Tidal Pages despite offers of more luxurious accommodations elsewhere. Harborview had given her shelter when she needed it most. She wouldn't abandon it now. The call from the Atlantic came in late August. They wanted to feature Olivia in their annual Literary Voices issue, a prestigious spotlight typically reserved for established authors. The photo shoot would take place at Tidal Pages, focusing on the small-town origins of her literary journey. They're also requesting an in-depth interview, her new publicist explained. They specifically want to discuss your background, including your connection to Reed Publishing. Olivia hesitated. Until now, she had deflected questions about her family, focusing instead on the universal themes in her writing. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, Julian assured her that evening as they discussed the opportunity. They sat on her small balcony, the bookstore cat purring between them. Your story is yours to tell, or not, as you choose. Olivia. Watch the harbor lights reflecting on the water. I used to think silence protected me, she said slowly, but I've learned it only protected them. She turned to Julian, her decision made. I'm going to tell the truth, not to hurt them, but because my journey might help someone else find their voice. The Atlantic article published in October was titled The Quiet Reed, How Olivia Reed Found Her Voice After Being Written Out of a Publishing Dynasty. It was thoughtful, nuanced, and unflinchingly honest about the emotional cost of being erased by her own family. Alongside the narrative of her literary success ran the parallel story of her personal transformation and the unexpected love that had blossomed with her editor. Sometimes rejection is redirection, Olivia was quoted saying. Being excluded from my family's legacy forced me to discover my own. The article catapulted Silent Wings back up the bestseller lists and generated a new wave of interest in Olivia's story. Television producers called wanting to option the rights. Universities invited her to speak about resilience and authenticity. Through it all, Julian remained her anchor, the person who saw her not as a Reed, not as a rising literary star, but simply as Olivia. I've been thinking, he said one evening as they walked home from dinner, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. Westridge is opening a West Coast office next year. They've asked me to head it up. Olivia looked at him in surprise. You'd leave New York? The publishing world is changing, he smiled. Editors don't need to be in Manhattan anymore. Besides, I've grown rather fond of small coastal towns. As they reached her apartment, Julian took both her hands in his. I don't want to pressure you. Your life is transforming so quickly, and you should explore all the opportunities coming your way. But I want you to know, wherever you decide to go, I'd like to be there with you. Olivia thought of how far she'd come from that morning at the train station with one suitcase and a wounded heart. She'd found more than success here. She'd found herself. I think, she said softly, we could write something beautiful together. The final chapter, the National Literary Awards ceremony, was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, transforming the Temple of Dendur into a glittering showcase for the publishing world's elite. Olivia stood at the periphery of the reception, a vision in midnight blue, watching crystal champagne flutes catch the light. 2 years ago she would have been invisible here. Tonight she was a nominee for Best Debut Novel. Nervous, Julian appeared at her side, handsome in his tailored suit, offering a glass of sparkling water. Not about the award, Olivia admitted, accepting the drink. But this is their territory. The Reeds have sponsored this event for decades. Julian followed her gaze across the room, where Nathaniel Reed held court among a circle of publishing executives. Even from a distance, the resemblance between brother and sister was evident. The same refined features and poised bearing, though Nathaniel's expression carried a sharpness Olivia's lacked. We don't have to stay for the entire evening, Julian reminded her. Say the word and we'll make our excuses. Olivia squeezed his hand. No, I've earned my place here. The past year had unfolded like chapters from a story more extraordinary than any Olivia could have written. Silent Wings had remained on the bestseller list for 42 weeks, been translated into 27 languages, and was now being adapted for a limited series. Her second novel, completed in Julian's converted farmhouse on the outskirts of Harbourview, was scheduled for release in the spring. Most significantly, Westridge Press had grown from a respected small publisher into a cultural force, with Julian's editorial vision and Olivia's literary success creating a platform for other authentic voices. Their partnership, both personal and professional, had become the subject of literary world admiration. Olivia Reed. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Penelope stood before them, elegant as ever in designer couture, though Olivia noticed fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "Hello, Penelope," Olivia replied evenly. An awkward silence stretched between them before Penelope gestured toward Julian. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your editor?" "Julian Caldwell," he supplied, offering his hand. "I believe your assistant has called our office several times regarding potential acquisitions." Penelope's smile tightened. "Yes, well, Reed Publishing is always interested in promising smaller imprints." "We're not for sale," Julian said pleasantly. "But thank you for your interest." Penelope turned her attention back to Olivia. "Your success has been unexpected. Father would have been surprised." "That was always the problem," Olivia replied softly. "He never saw me clearly enough to have any expectations at all." Before Penelope could respond, a distinguished woman with silver hair approached their group. "Olivia Reed, I've been hoping to meet you." She introduced herself as the head of PEN America. "Your Atlantic interview about finding your voice after being silenced has sparked important conversations about power dynamics in creative fields." As the woman engaged Olivia in animated conversation, Penelope drifted away, her expression unreadable. "You handled that gracefully," Julian murmured when they were alone again. "It felt different than I expected," Olivia confessed. "I thought seeing her would resurrect old pain, but she seems so small now. Not the towering figure who once made me feel insignificant." Their conversation was interrupted by the announcement that the ceremony would begin shortly. As guests moved toward the seated area, Olivia felt a presence at her elbow. Ms. Reed. Nathaniel's voice was exactly as she remembered, cultured, confident, with that underlying note of calculation. "A moment of your time." Julian gave her a questioning look, but Olivia nodded reassuringly. "I'll join you inside." Standing face to face with her brother for the first time in 3 years, Olivia was struck by how tired he looked beneath his polished exterior. "Congratulations on your nomination," Nathaniel offered stiffly. "The critics have been very enthusiastic about your work." "Thank you," Olivia replied. "Though I suspect this conversation isn't about literary accolades." A flicker of the old Nathaniel, impatient, dismissive, crossed his features before he composed himself. "Your Atlantic interview has created certain complications. Our father's decisions regarding the family business were private matters. My experiences weren't business decisions, Nathaniel. They were personal rejections that shaped my life." "Nevertheless," he continued, "the board feels that the perceived rift in the Reed family presents reputational challenges. They've suggested that a reconciliation would benefit all parties." Olivia couldn't help but laugh. "The board? You mean you're concerned about how my success outside the family empire makes you look?" "Actually, yes." Olivia's voice was gentle but firm. "Because you're not here out of love or remorse. You're here because my name now carries